Hey everyone, Trevor Noah here. So you know how people are always saying the world's about to end? Yeah, me too. It's like the ultimate clickbait, right? World War III imminent. But seriously folks, with all the crazy stuff happening in the world today, it's hard not to wonder if those headlines are onto something. Are we really on the brink of another global conflict? Now, I'm not saying we should all start building bunkers and hoarding canned goods, although if you've got a spare can of peaches, hit me up. But it's important to talk about these things, to understand the forces that drive conflict and to explore ways to prevent it. So, buckle up, buttercups. We're about to dive deep into the wild world of international relations. Don't worry, I promise to make it as painless and maybe even a little bit funny as possible. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about politics and power struggles. It's about our future. It's about creating a world where our kids and grandkids don't have to live in fear of the big one. This is a conversation we all need to be having. So, grab your thinking caps, or, just your phones, and let's get into it. Because the fate of the world might just depend on it. Okay, maybe that's a bit dramatic. But hey, you clicked on the article, so you're clearly interested. Let's do this. Okay, let's be real for a second. Conflict is a part of human nature. It's messy, it's complicated, and it's been around since, well, forever. From squabbles over the last slice of pizza to full-blown wars, we humans seem to have a knack for disagreeing. But does that mean another world war is inevitable? Well, the good news, and by good news I mean slightly less terrifying news, is that history doesn't repeat itself. At least, not exactly. The world today is vastly different from the one that plunged into chaos in the 20th century. We have nuclear weapons, more on those delightful little surprises later, globalized economies, and the internet. All of these factors make a large-scale conflict much more complicated and potentially catastrophic than ever before. But here's the thing, just because something is complicated doesn't mean it's impossible, and just because something hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it never will. So what are the chances of World War III actually happening? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball, although if I did, predicting the future would be the least of my talents. But what I can do is break down some of the key factors that could lead to a global conflict. So, let's get to it, shall we? Alright, let's talk about the elephants in the room, shall we? The big players on the world stage who have the power to start, or stop, a global conflict. First up, we've got the usual suspects, the United States, Russia, and China. These three countries possess the largest militaries and the most nuclear weapons in the world. And let's just say they haven't always seen eye to eye on, well, anything. Then there are the regional powers like India, Pakistan, and Iran. These countries may not have the same global reach as the big three, but they're certainly capable of causing a whole lot of trouble in their own backyards. And when tensions flare up in volatile regions like the Middle East or South Asia, it can quickly draw in the big players, turning a local conflict into a global one. But here's the thing about international relations. It's not as simple as good guys versus bad guys. Countries are complex entities with their own interests, goals, and internal struggles. And those interests don't always align with the interests of other countries. So while it's easy to point fingers and say, this country is the biggest threat to world peace, the reality is much more nuanced than that. It's about understanding the motivations and perspectives of all the players involved. And that, my friends, is where things start to get really interesting. And by interesting, I mean potentially terrifying. Now, let's talk about proxy wars. These are conflicts where major powers support different sides in a smaller conflict, often without directly engaging each other. Think of it like a really messed up game of chess, where the pawns are actual human beings. Proxy wars have been a feature of international relations for decades, and they're a prime example of how regional conflicts can escalate into something much bigger. Take the Syrian civil war, for example. What started as a domestic uprising against the Assad regime quickly turned into a proxy war between the United States, Russia, Iran, and various other regional powers. Each country had its own interests in the conflict, and they used the Syrian people as pawns in their geopolitical games. The result? Hundreds of thousands of people dead, millions displaced, and a country in ruins. And Syria is just one example. Proxy wars are raging in Yemen, Libya, and other parts of the world, fueled by the meddling of outside powers. These conflicts may not be global in scale yet, but they have the potential to draw in the big players, leading to a wider conflict. And that, my friends, is a very scary thought. Okay, so we've talked about traditional warfare, but in the 21st century, there's a whole new set of threats to worry about. Cyber warfare and disinformation. These days, you don't need tanks and missiles to cripple a country. All you need is a team of skilled hackers and a whole lot of fake news. Cyber attacks can disrupt critical infrastructure, steal sensitive information, and even influence elections. And disinformation campaigns can sow discord, undermine trust in institutions, and manipulate public opinion. These tactics are often difficult to attribute to specific actors, which makes them even more dangerous. After all, if you don't know who your enemy is, how can you fight back? The rise of cyber warfare and disinformation has blurred the lines between war and peace. Is a cyber attack an act of war? What about a disinformation campaign that interferes with an election? These are questions that international law is still grappling with. And as these tactics become more sophisticated and widespread, they have the potential to spark a conflict that could quickly escalate out of control. Now, for all you doom and gloom enthusiasts out there, let's talk about the doomsday clock. This metaphorical timepiece, maintained by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, represents how close humanity is to global catastrophe. The closer the clock is to midnight, the closer we are to annihilation. So, how close are we to the end of the world as we know it? Well, as of 2023, the doomsday clock is set at 90 seconds to midnight. That's the closest it's ever been to midnight since its creation in 1947. Yikes. The scientists behind the clock cite a number of factors for this dire prediction, including the ongoing war in Ukraine, the escalating climate crisis, and the threat of nuclear war. But before you start stocking up on canned goods and building your underground bunker, remember that the doomsday clock is just a symbol. It's a way to raise awareness about the existential threats facing humanity and to encourage action to address them. So while the clock may be ticking, it's not too late to turn things around. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the things that could go wrong, but what about the things that could go right? Is there any hope for peace in this crazy world? Well, believe it or not, there is. And it all comes down to one word: diplomacy. Diplomacy is the art of conducting negotiations between nations. It's about finding common ground, building relationships, and resolving disputes peacefully. It's not always glamorous or exciting, but it's the foundation of a stable and peaceful world order. Think of diplomats as the therapists of the international community. They're the ones who have to listen to everyone's problems, mediate disputes, and try to keep the peace. And let me tell you, that's not an easy job. But despite the challenges, diplomacy has a proven track record of success. It's helped to prevent countless wars, resolve conflicts peacefully, and foster cooperation between nations. So the next time you hear someone say that talking never solves anything, remind them that diplomacy has literally saved the world countless times. Now, diplomacy doesn't happen in a vacuum. It needs institutions and frameworks to support it. That's where international organizations come in. These organizations, like the United Nations, provide a forum for dialogue, cooperation, and conflict resolution between nations. The UN in particular has played a critical role in maintaining international peace and security since its founding in 1945. It's helped to mediate conflicts, provide humanitarian assistance, and promote human rights around the world. It's not perfect, of course. The UN has faced its share of criticisms over the years, from accusations of inefficiency to concerns about its effectiveness in preventing conflicts. But despite its flaws, the UN remains an essential institution for promoting peace and cooperation in the 21st century. It provides a platform for dialogue, a framework for conflict resolution, and a symbol of our shared humanity. So while the UN may not be a perfect solution, it's a vital part of the quest for a more peaceful and just world. So, we've covered a lot of ground here, from the causes of conflict to the importance of diplomacy and international organizations. But you might be wondering, what can I do about all of this? I'm just one person, and you'd be right, you are just one person. But guess what? One person can make a difference. The first step is to stay informed. Read about international affairs, follow credible news sources, and engage in thoughtful discussions about these issues. The more you know about the world, the better equipped you'll be to make a difference. Next, get involved in organizations that are working to promote peace, understanding, and cooperation. There are countless NGOs, think tanks, and advocacy groups out there that are doing amazing work on these issues. You can volunteer your time, donate to their cause, or simply spread the word about their work. And finally, don't underestimate the power of your own voice. Talk to your friends and family about these issues. Write to your elected officials and let them know that you care about peace and diplomacy. Remember, change starts from the ground up. By raising awareness, getting involved, and using your voice, you can contribute to a more peaceful and just world. We've reached the end of our journey, my friends. We've explored the complexities of global conflict, the ever-present threat of war, and the importance of diplomacy and international cooperation. It's been a wild ride, hasn't it? But here's the thing, this conversation can't end here. In fact, it's more important than ever to keep talking about these issues. So, here's what I want you to do. Share this article, talk to your friends, family, colleagues, and that random person you met at the coffee shop. Let's break down the barriers of silence and ignorance. Let's foster a global dialogue about peace, understanding, and cooperation. Because at the end of the day, the future of our planet depends on it. No pressure, right? So is World War III unavoidable? Honestly, I don't have the answer. Nobody does. But here's what I do know. We have a choice. We can choose to succumb to fear and division, or we can choose to embrace hope and cooperation. We can choose to be passive bystanders, or we can choose to be active agents of change. The path to peace is rarely easy, but it's a journey we must take together. So let's choose wisely, my friends. The fate of the world may very well depend on it.